Hello to another day of my equestrian life. And today is our first cold day in ages, probably like 6 months. And it's very windy today, and we have a high of 63, and that's freezing for Florida. And like any good cold windy day, it's the best day to start desensitizing your horse, or at least give him a refresh. Now, I personally don't desensitize my horses very often, mostly because if I do it once, it sticks with them for like a year. I normally do it once a year, but this is my first time desensitizing Sebastian. So it took 48 minutes. We were out here 48 minutes waving pool noodles, tarps, trash bags, ropes, and buckets. And this is sort of going to be like an educational video on how I desensitize my horses. I desensitize the horse you'll see in the back, which is my sister, and Maddie's son, the chestnut Ranish roan. She looks like a roan. This is my personal horse right now, Sebastian, and then the little pony with my sister, like I said, is Maddie's son, the little red roan. And I desensitized her years back, and she's still really broke to desensitization. She's not a spooky horse. And then I had a little Mustang that I trained from very, very green that I also desensitized. And these are my steps of how I do it. Now, every horse is different. Every single. So I have had Sebastian for about 9 or 10 months now, and I have not done any desensitization with him, for the sole reason of I was just simply building up trust. Now, this was a big problem I had with him. He's not a spooky guy, which is why I didn't really prioritize desensitizing, because he's never spooked with me in the 9 months I've ridden him. He's had times where he sort of like stopped and stepped to the side with his ears looking at it, but he's never like jumped out of his skin. He's never given me any concern that he's a spooky horse at all. I mean, he is rock solid when it comes to not being spooky. But there is one thing he is spooky with, and it's me. So a lot of the times he's like more spooky with me holding items and directing those items towards him than he is actually at the items, if that makes any sense. Now, the Mustang I had, he was just a spooky horse because he was a wild Mustang at one point of his life, and Mustangs are very different from horses that have been touched since the day where they were born. Now, Sebastian is a bit special because he was a bronc, which means for a while he was kind of a bit of wild. If you know anything about bronking horses, they're not really broke horses. In a way, they kind of are similar to the Mustangs. But he has had some not very good past times before I got him. And broncs don't really usually are handled by halters because, like I said, they're not broke. They're normally handled by tying their ears. Sort of like when you tie a rope around their nose. Some people do that too. I don't do those things, but he's very ear shy for that reason. Now, as I build up trust with him, he does let me touch his ears now. Before, I couldn't even put my hands beside his head. But that wasn't really the goal today. The goal of today was 2 things. One, I wanted to break any spookiness he may have had to spooky items, and 2, I wanted to break any fear he had that whatever I'm holding I'm going to hurt him with, which is easier said than done, and I'm going to have to do this multiple times before I can fully get him to like calm down. So out of all the items, I had a tarp, a trash bag, I threw buckets over him. The most spooky one was this pool noodle that I would go and I would touch him with. He doesn't like it when I directly touch him with an item. If the item is on the floor, he'll walk over it, no problem. The first time he might twitch or spook or jump, second time he's fine. But this pool noodle, he would not let me rub him with it at all. I could throw the pool noodle at him, I could toss it over his back. He would step over the pool noodle, but if that pool noodle was in my hand and I was walking towards him, that really sets him off. And in the beginning, when I first owned him in the first month, he had that problem too, but with brushes. I would walk out there to brush him, and he didn't like what I had in my hand, and he would just spook. Now, every horse is different. If you have a spookier horse, like consistency is the best thing I can tell you. I have not owned a spooky horse yet. Most of the time, my horses just are a little dumb and need some educating. So I can't really say, I can't help you if you have a spooky horse. But I've had a Mustang, and with the Mustang, he was very spooky at first, but I basically walked him around the stuff he was scared of, and like let him smell it and let him sort of desensitize himself, and that worked out pretty well with him. Very slow and easy with him. The mare that you'll see walking by every now and then with my little sister Maddie's son, I literally just threw a tarp on top of her and then sat on her bareback on top of the tarp and rode her around like that.
Excuse you, sir.
it was very long time ago. I was 11 years old and I was very young and not very smart. But that's the way I desensitized her. Now with Sebastian, I'm doing there's like two methods to desensitizing in my opinion that I have used. The first one is like letting the horse desensitize themselves, which Sebastian doesn't have a problem with because he's not a spooky guy to the items. He does that pretty easily. With him, I sort of have to like desensitize the items and myself with the items, which sometimes the horses can also be spooking at, especially if you had a horse that doesn't have the best trained past. So that's mainly what we did, and we did this for 48 minutes straight. There was quite a few large spooks, but the biggest hurdle to overcome was probably that pool noodle. He was very spooky of the tarp at first. It took probably 3 or 4 large spooks, and he was sort of done. Like, he wasn't fully relaxed, but he wasn't spooking either. So, like, when you're desensitizing a horse, you have to be very good at reading the body language because you have to be very concerned of your own safety, too. Because, in my opinion, there's nothing more dangerous than a scared horse because they are prey animals, which means they're always going to have a strong prey instinct. So if you have a horse that gets into like the high headset of when it starts spooking, it just becomes spooky for the rest of the time, which was sort of with the Mustang. He would become very spooky and I couldn't break the spookiness. Like, I couldn't get him out of this trance of everything's out to get him. And he was a wild Mustang at one point, so his prey instinct was much stronger than, say, a horse that's been touched its entire life. So what I recommend for that is I have this neat little trick that you'll see me do at one point, where you'll pull down on their halter, and when they lower their head, you'll give the command. I use the command rest, and they lower their head. And from what I understand, I'll have to research into it again, but when a horse's head is high, adrenaline rushes to their brain very easily. But when their head is low, the opposite of adrenaline, which is a very scientific name that I do not remember, also rushes to their head. So a low headset on a horse that tends to spook a lot is something very important to get them into that rest thing. Now, Sebastian is very different from the other horses I've trained. He doesn't get into a spooky mindset. He gets into the mindset that I'm after him. So what I'm mostly doing is I'm making him step towards me. And I'll release the pressure when he steps towards me. And sometimes I'll just walk after him as he backs up and touch him with the pool noodle. And as soon as I touch him and he relaxes, I release the pressure. So with him, it's a lot of pressure and release. Just by like, not even like actual pressure, just my body language and the pool noodle and like several other variables going all around at all times. With horses, you have to be multitasking like 5 different things at the same time. But with him, it was sort of just pressure and release. The second he calmed down to the spooky item or spooking at me, I would automatically drop it or take it off him and feed him the treats and give him that reward, pet him. And if he ended up getting too wound up or he did really well and I was going to give him a break so he could think about it, what I'll do is I'll make him rest his head, I'll give him treats, and then I play with his lips. Because I noticed that, like, this is one of the things, this is why I haven't done desensitization till 9 months of having him, because now I've picked up on some of his habits that I know of. For instance, when he gets really stressed, his lips will tense up. So sometimes I'll take a moment to mess with his lips and loosen them up and bother his face and touch him and kiss him, and that really relaxes him 95% of the time. And I think it sort of helps him realize, like, I'm not out to get him at any given level, and I think that sort of makes the connections in his brain. But that's just him. And the one thing that's very difficult with horse training is that you sort of really have to know the horse, especially if you want to train them slow, easy, and well and not make any mistakes, because every horse is different. So this is sort of just my experiences with 3 horses that I've owned before and trained. Now, when I first start desensitization, the first step I do is I walk with the item in front of me and I make the horse walk behind me. So I'm not really facing them with the item and the item's not facing them either. It's sort of like the item is between me to him. Like, between him and the item is me. So that sort of like helps them relax a bit more, get a chance to look at it, to see how it moves, what color it is, what is so scary about it. Give him a second to think. Now, that method didn't work very well with him. I found it better just to chase him around until he relaxed with the item, which some horses just do better with. I know it was that way with the spicy little hot red Madison. You sort of just had to chase her around until she was like bored of running away from you, and she's like, okay, fine, I'm done. And then after that, she's been broke since. So, and with the Mustang, I sort of let him desensitize himself because he was not spooky at me, more spooky at the item. Now, like I said, Sebastian's a special case because he's in reality more spooky of me than the actual item. Now, he also gets fairly spooky for whatever reason, not sure why, when he sees, like, for instance, one time he spooked pretty hard because Anya had jumped on Madison when he was beside her, or when Anya throws a saddle over Madison's back and he's near her. For whatever reason, it just makes him spooky. So Anya had been throwing the tarp on Madison, and I made him watch her as she threw the tarp and threw it off her. And that's also another reason, like, we did this in conjunction. Sometimes it's better, especially for younger horses that easily confused and don't have the best knowledge of the world because they're young, to have a more experienced older horse doing the same things as they are doing nearby, because horses have a pack mentality and they'll watch those around them, which is another great thing you can do if you got a spooky horse. Now, one of the most important things is consistency, especially if you have a very spooky horse. With my horses that I've owned, I've never really had to be consistent with desensitizing because I normally did it once and it sort of just stuck with them for a very long time. And I might refresh it like once a year if they're like getting spooky on windy days. But if you have a very spooky horse, consistency in my opinion is a horse's best friend. I have taught everything to my horses through consistency. There's like not very often that I teach them something new and it just sticks with them. Desensitization being one of those very few things. But that's just been with my horses, and it might not be the case with yours. Now, another thing I also recommend for spooky horses, that a lot of times spookiness can be cause of environment, not just specific items, colors, or things, or people. It can also very much depend on the environment, which is horse riding and training has so many variables to it that it's sometimes very hard to do because, there's just so many different pieces and parts. So today, you'll see I'm just sort of desensitizing to materials and myself, but I'm also picking to do this on a windy, cold day when I know a horse will be most likely to want to be spooky compared to like a warm, sunny day. Now, if you have a very spooky horse that is very reactive, start at the easiest level and slowly work up to desensitizing on cold, windy days. But I have a lot of confidence in Sebastian. Like I said, I've known him for 9 months now. I've learned a lot about him. He's learned a lot about me. And he's a very confident horse, and he has his weaknesses, which is why we're desensitizing today. But I trust him pretty well that he's not going to hurt me. But I know sometimes reactive horses can tend to freak out. And like I said, a spooky mentality horse is a very dangerous horse because of that prey mentality they have. And it's a very hard thing to break because, well, they're prey. It's in their genetics. But I also recommend like not shying away from only riding on sunny days because you don't want your horse to spook on a windy day. You're only going to encourage the bad habit. So one thing I do is that if I have strange weather, I will go and jump on my horse every time. I've ridden him at night. I've ridden him at dawn. I've ridden him at sunsets. I've ridden him through rain, through thunderstorms. I've ridden him through when Florida frosted and snowed a bit. We actually had last winter a lot of snow and everything frosted and everything was white. And it was very strange weather for Florida. It was a phenomenon. Sorry if I mispronounced that word. I suck at speaking. And I went that morning, in the very cold morning, where we had no heater, no nothing. I was freezing, and I went and jumped on him and took him through a ride on the very icy woods. And I've learned that just having that mentality of instead of shying away from scary environments, you go into there with confidence and make it fun for both you and the horse. So that's one of my recommendations also, because environment has a lot to do with horses being spooky. Like, for instance, a trailer is a very spooky environment. When you have a trailer shy horse, you slowly want to work up to that trailer. Like, I know some horses tend to freak out when they're put into enclosed areas, which is why a lot of horses dislike the trailer. And I can see why they have that fear. I mean, I'm not going to get angry at them. I wouldn't want to be in an enclosed space either if I was a prey animal. There's nowhere to run. So you can even start, if you have a problem with spooking in the trailer, or spooking going next to the trailer or in the trailer, you can also, like, sometimes I'll line up barrels in a very small shape where only my horse will fit, and I'll make them squeeze through there. Like, I'll start just with the hand and lead, and eventually I'll move on to riding them. Like, right now I have the goal, which I was a little upset that he didn't like the pool noodle, because I had a goal to do with the pool noodle. I was hoping he was going to be fine, where I was going to have me and my sister ride and slap each other with pool noodles. But we're slowly building up to that, and that is one of my end goals for desensitization for him and my sister. And besides that, also is fairly good practice at following other horses. Anywho, like I said, start out small, be consistent, slowly get bigger, more challenging as you go along with the horse. That, in my opinion, is the best way to train. You start out small, you're consistent, and you slowly make it more challenging as they master the consistency of the easy training. And that has always worked out for me, and it's always made very good solid horses for me, which I very much enjoy. Now, even today on this 50-minute desensitization work, I was implementing that consistency and slowly making the challenger harder and harder. For instance, we started off by just trying to be able to touch him with the pool noodle, and as he got better with the pool noodle getting touched by it, then we slowly moved on to rubbing, which is a very good practice to rub the horse with a scary item, because it implements, like, scratching in a way. And then after he got better with the rubbing, which eventually he did, I mean, it took 50 minutes, but eventually he did, then we started with tapping, because like I said, I wanted to build up to eventually being able to ride and smack each other with pool noodles. Not hard, but like, you get my point, to play around with it. So once we moved off from rubbing, I started moving on to tapping, which he actually did pretty well with. He didn't care for the tapping, and if anything, the rubbing was more scary than the tapping. For whatever reason, I don't know. I can't be in his head all the time, but he preferred the tapping over the rubbing, so at least I have that going for me. But today was sort of a day where I pushed some buttons that I've never really touched before, because I was building his trust with me. Some of those buttons were, like, I started really bothering his ears. Before, I wouldn't really bother them all too much. If he let me touch them, I would go and rub them a little bit till he turned his head away. Today, I sort of just, like, forced myself to rub and squeeze and play with them until he let me, which he wasn't the happiest about, but it was a lot better than he's ever been before with his ears. And then, of course, I went and I got a rope. A big thing with horses is ropes. Especially with him, I've noticed that he doesn't like it when ropes wrap around his legs, which can become very dangerous if your horse were to get his reins stuck on his legs by accident. So that's a very good thing to desensitize. One of the biggest things with desensitization is not only because I don't want a spooky horse, it's also because I'm trying to train for the unknown. So if a tarp were to jump out of nowhere, I don't necessarily want to hurt myself as well as the horse if, for instance, we come across a tarp on the trail. So this is sort of in preparation. And as I train him more, my end goal is to sort of make like a war horse out of him. Very broke, very desensitized. We've already been practicing some dressage moves for funsies, because that's the original training of war horses, was dressage, if you didn't know. Jumping, I teach him it all. So one of the things I also have to teach him for this goal is to not spook at whatever might come along his way. Now another thing is animals. I know some horses are very spooky with animals. He was a bucking horse, and then he was a ranching horse, so he roped cattle for a very long time. So he sort of has just been working his whole life before he got to my hands, where I sort of just do this for funsies. So now he gets to trot over poles and trot pretty with his legs, with his head nice and tucked in, which he's never done before in his life. So in a way, he's sort of learning all this for the first time, which some horses haven't, some horses have. I'm pretty sure the red pony, Madison, has been trained well before in her life because I've never really had problems with her before. She's just spunky. She just has a bit of a fiery attitude. But with him, he's just like completely clean slate. He's a white canvas. He's basically just trail broke, can rope, and that's about it. So I've been having a lot of fun sort of painting my colors onto this canvas. But anyways, in my opinion, it was a pretty successful day, as by the end of the 58 minutes lesson, which is probably it's a very long time for him because I only ride for like 30 minutes plus like putting his bridle on. But at the end of the day, I was able to get him a lot less spooky than we begun. He wasn't necessarily relaxed while we were doing things, but he wasn't spooking either. He was still very tense, and my obvious goal would not for him to be tense while going through this. I want his head low and his ears in airplane mode, like hanging off his head, like trying to fall asleep while I was doing this. And that's the eventual goal. But it was definitely a lot better from where we started. I mean, a lot better. And to finish it off, I jumped on him once from the right side, and then I turned him around and I jumped onto him on the opposite side, the side you're not supposed to get on, because I do know with some horses, they can start bucking when you get on the other side, and I don't like that, because if I'm ever in the situation, like I said, I train for any situation where his right side is blocked and I can only get on him from the left, then I sort of want him to be okay with me getting on him on the left and not break out bucking. But my other horse, Madison, is completely chill. You could jump on her from her butt and she doesn't care. So that's the goal, to train for every possibility or any problem we might run into. I never want to run into a problem and my horse be spooking out on top of it or freaking out because he's never done that before. I want to train for every possibility. So yeah, we finished off the day. I spent he got 2 cups of alfalfa peds because this entire time I was giving him treats. I don't care for treat training, but with some horses you train with treats. I personally like to start them off with treats and then eventually wean them off the treats and not be doing everything for treats. I normally use the treats as like with the Mustang, for instance. When I got him, he was very green and he didn't realize that petting was a reward. He just thought that I was rubbing. He never made that connection. So for a while with him, I used treats because it sort of makes them understand, oh, okay, what I just did was correct. But eventually, as the horse begins to understand, when I pet him and say, good boy, what he did was right, I eventually wean him off the treats. But I do use treats often. I prefer if I don't have to use treats, but I'm not going to hate on the treats either. For instance, Madison, the little pony, you cannot train her with treats at all. You pull out a handful of alfalfa pellets and her little brain shuts down. I mean, it just shuts down on you. And she cannot think of anything but the treats you have in that pocket, and she will not do anything. So with her, I didn't do any treat training because she could not learn with treats at the same time. It wasn't her thing. Like I said, every horse is different, and you have to learn the horse before you can train it well. But sometimes there are stereotypes in horses, So I guess if you train them long enough, you eventually learn, the stereotype personalities and how to deal with them. But I prefer not to train with treats. I eventually wean my horses off treats as they master the things they have learned. If it's something new or something scary, I will give them treats. But other than that, yeah, it was a good day.